hospital knew that. The woman quietly mopping the hallway floors had once decided life and death on a battlefield. They mocked her for her trembling hands. They looked down on her for her silence. But just a few hours later, that very hospital would be begging her to save everyone. If you skip this story, you will miss a terrifying truth. The most dangerous person is sometimes the one most underestimated. Every morning at Riverside Regional Hospital began the same way. Cold fluorescent lights reflected off the polished tile floors. The sharp smell of disinfectant mixed with burnt coffee drifted from the staff lounge. Heart monitors beeped steadily, like the breathing of a massive machine that never slept. This was a place for people who believed they controlled life and death. Young doctors hurried through the corridors, crisp white lab coats pressed clean, leather shoes gleaming. They spoke in medical terminology, successful surgeries, research grants, conferences in New York or Chicago. In this world, reputation was currency, and ego was a weapon. And then, amid all that confidence, Emily Carter appeared. No greetings, no searching glances for approval. She walked half a step behind everyone else, pushing a metal utility cart that rattled on the floor. The nurse's uniform she wore looked slightly too large, as if it had been issued to someone else before finally reaching her. Light brown hair was neatly tied at the nape of her neck, a few loose strands falling across her forehead. Her face was unmade, expressionless, marked only by a faint scar near her left eyebrow. Small enough that no one asked about it, but clear enough that it couldn't be ignored. What drew the most attention were her hands. They trembled slightly. Not much, not violently, just a subtle movement, small enough to miss unless someone was watching. And they were watching. "New nurse?" A voice sounded behind her, tinged with curiosity and, more heavily, judgment. Emily stopped and turned. "Yes?" One word, low and slightly hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken much in a long time. The man nodded absently and walked away, as if he'd already gotten all the information he needed. At Riverside, no one had time for stories that didn't add value. Emily understood that on her very first morning. She was assigned the jobs no one wanted: cleaning rooms, mopping floors, changing bed sheets, night shifts, weekend shifts. The hours when laughter disappeared and only emergency lights remained. No one asked why a 38-year-old woman was starting over in this role. No one asked why her file looked so strangely empty. And Emily didn't explain. In the staff break room, the whispers spread quickly. "She doesn't look like a nurse. Did you see her hands shaking? Probably meds. Or nerves." The laughter was quiet, not loud enough to be called cruel, but clear enough to be intentional. Emily heard everything. She heard it while mopping floors, while waiting for the elevator, even while pushing the trash cart down the long hallway where echoes carried farther than necessary. But she didn't react. Not because she didn't understand the insult, but because she had been in places where insult was a luxury. Places where, if you weren't fast enough, you died. If you weren't quiet enough, the whole team died. Compared to that, a few words behind her back weren't worth the energy. Still, there was one person who never missed a chance to assert his authority. Tyler Brooks, second-year resident. Not yet 30, smart, sharp, and convinced the world should run his way. "Hey, Emily." He drew out her name the way someone spoke to a server at a diner. She stopped. "Take this coat to be cleaned, and while you're at it, please get me a coffee, black, no sugar." He tossed the lab coat toward her. It struck Emily's shoulder. In that moment, the hallway seemed to fall silent for a second. Emily bent down and picked up the coat. She looked up at Tyler. For a fraction of a second, her eyes changed. Not anger, not defiance, but something cold and sharp, like metal catching weak light. Tyler hesitated, only for a split second. but long enough for the smug smile on his face to falter. "Coffee," Emily said. Her voice was quiet but clear. Then she turned and walked away. Tyler stood there a moment longer as if he'd forgotten what he was about to say next. Then he shook his head and scoffed. Creepy. Emily didn't hear it, or if she did, she didn't care. She stepped into the supply room and dropped the coat into the laundry bin. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a paper cup. Not from fear, not from anxiety, but from memory. Some tremors never disappear. They learn to hide until familiar sounds pull them back. For Emily, those sounds were helicopter blades, metal clashing, the smell of disinfectant mixed with blood. She had left the military 3 years ago, but the military had never left her. Emily chose Riverside for one simple reason. It was loud. Machines humming, code calls are echoing, people shouting in desperation. The noise helped her sleep. In silence, memories screamed. In chaos, they were drowned out. She wasn't looking for attention. She wasn't looking for redemption. She only wanted to do the work she knew how to do. Keep people alive a little longer. No one at Riverside knew that. To them, Emily was just a new nurse, out of place and not meant to be there. And perhaps that was precisely what saved them later. Afternoons at Riverside Regional were never tranquil. They merely shifted from the daytime noise into a deeper, simmering tension. Arizona sunlight slanted through the tall glass windows, leaving long streaks of light across the corridor floors. Day shift staff began wrapping up, while the evening shift quietly arrived, carrying more tired faces, but more alert. In a hospital, people learned not to show emotion because emotion could slow a hand by just one beat, and one beat was enough to lose a life. Emily Carter was changing bed linens in the last patient room along the south wing. Her movements were steady and precise, nothing extra, nothing missing. She worked like someone accustomed to not being allowed to make mistakes. The heart monitor beside the bed emitted a steady rhythm. The patient slept deeply, face gaunt but stable. Emily adjusted the IV line, glanced at the readings, and wrote a few brief notes. No flourish, no explanations. A young nurse passed by, glanced at the monitor, and frowned slightly. "You didn't write more details?" Emily looked up. "I wrote what needed to be written." The nurse shrugged and walked on. At Riverside, people didn't like the quiet ones. They made others feel out of control. Emily pushed her cart into the hallway when the intercom sounded. Not the usual call. 3 short, sharp tones. Everything around her seemed to slow by a single beat. Code Black, Trauma Bay 1, ETA 3 minutes. In that instant, the entire hospital seemed to inhale deeply. The break room doors burst open, footsteps thundered across the floor, names shouted, orders barked, gurneys are racing around corners. Emily stood still beside her linen cart. She wasn't assigned to Trauma Bay 1. Her name wasn't on the rapid response list. By protocol, she should have continued her duties. But then another sound cut through everything. A low, heavy, steady sound, like a massive heartbeat pounding through the air. Emily froze. She didn't need to look out the window. She didn't need confirmation. Her body recognized it before her mind did. This wasn't a civilian helicopter, not the kind used for urban emergency response. It was the sound of something that had once carried her into and out of hell. Emily's fingers tightened around the cart handle. Her breathing shifted just slightly. "Not my job," she whispered as a reminder. But her legs didn't listen. Trauma Bay 1 was controlled chaos, held together by commands. The doors burst open. A stretcher rushed in, followed by people in civilian clothes, but carrying an unmistakable presence, straight backs, alert eyes, moving as a single unit. The man on the stretcher was soaked in blood. Bandages are dark and heavy, IV lines tangled, breathing shallow. Male, 41. Multiple gunshot wounds. Blood pressure dropping fast. Chief Physician Michael Rowan swept in like a gust of wind. White lab coat, commanding voice, the familiar confidence of someone used to every eye turning toward him. All right, everyone, stay calm. We proceed as usual. Prepare transfusion, defibrillate if necessary. Emily stood in the corner, almost invisible. No one noticed her. No one asked what she was doing there. And that was precisely what allowed her to observe. She didn't look at the man's face, didn't focus on the apparent bullet wounds in his chest. Her eyes followed the blood. The blood wasn't flowing correctly. It wasn't spurting clearly like an open wound. It wasn't pooling anywhere obvious. It was disappearing. The man's abdomen was swelling, just slightly. No one noticed. No one had time. Arrhythmia! Prepare to shock! Emily swallowed hard. She had seen this before. Not in hospitals, but in places with no second chances. If they continued like this, the man would die. Not from lack of equipment, but from looking in the wrong place. Stop! Emily's voice came out rough and low. No one heard. There's internal bleeding, she said again, a little louder. The machines drowned her out. Dr. Rowan was focused on the chest, issuing commands, adjusting, defibrillating. Everything followed the textbook, and because of that, it was dangerous. Emily stepped forward. A resident turned, frowning. What are you doing here? Emily stared at the man's abdomen. Junctional hemorrhage, she said quickly. Major artery, not the chest. Nonsense. You're not authorized. A piercing sound cut through the room. A flat line stretched across the monitor. The room went dead silent for half a second. He's arresting! Defibrillate! Emily stopped thinking. There are moments when you no longer choose between correct procedure and correct truth. She pushed the resident aside, not forcefully, but decisively enough that it couldn't be stopped. Stop compressions, Emily said. Her voice dropped, firm, absolute, allowing no argument. Dr. Rowan spun around. What the hell do you think you're doing? Emily didn't answer. She pulled back the bandage at the upper thigh near the groin. The wound was minor, almost overlooked, but to Emily, that was where death had its grip on the man. She placed her hand down, then pressed hard. The room held its breath. This wasn't the gentle motion of a hospital. This was the rough, precise movement of someone who had done this in sand, in blood, under gunfire. The bleeding slowed, not completely, but enough. The monitor flickered with a weak beat, then another. No one spoke. Dr. Rowan stared at the screen as if he didn't trust his own eyes. Hold pressure, Emily said. Get a vascular clamp. This time, no one objected. When the clamp was placed correctly, when the bleeding was controlled, Emily slowly withdrew her hand. She removed her gloves. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear. The room began to breathe again. Now, you can handle the rest, Emily said, looking at Dr. Rowan. Her tone wasn't challenging, not smug, just factual. Then she turned away. She didn't wait for praise. She didn't wait for questions. She knew what would come next. And this time, her silence would no longer be forgiven. Emily Carter walked out of Trauma Bay 1 without looking back. The automatic doors slid shut behind her with a soft hiss, as if the room had just swallowed a secret it never wanted spoken aloud. The long hallway stretched out before her, colder and emptier than usual. At the far end, a large window overlooked the rooftop helipad. Desert winds whipped sand into the air, then let it settle again, leaving a dry, bone-deep stillness behind. Emily stopped for a few seconds. She peeled off the blood-stained glove, rolled it neatly, and dropped it into the medical waste bin. Her hands were shaking more visibly now, not from fear, but because the adrenaline was fading, exposing the familiar aches in her back and hips, old injuries that never fully healed. She rested her forehead against the cool wall and took a deep breath. "It's okay," she told herself. "He's alive." In her old world, that was enough. But Riverside Regional did not operate by those rules. Inside Trauma Bay 1, the atmosphere had shifted. The chaos was gone. The shouting had stopped. The machines hummed steadily again, as if that lethal flatline had never appeared on the monitor. Dr. Michael Rowan stood motionless at the operating table, both hands braced against the metal edge, his eyes locked on the vital signs, slowly stabilizing. He said nothing for several seconds. No one dared speak. He was the first to break the silence. "Who authorized her to do that?" His voice was low, not loud, but sharp as a blade. A resident glanced sideways. "She acted on her own." "On her own?" Rowan let out a soft laugh devoid of humor. "She shoved one of my staff, inserted her hand into a surgical field without full sterilization, violated every protocol we have. But the patient is alive because my team intervened in time," Rowan cut in. "Don't confuse luck with competence." No one argued. What had just happened in that room did not belong in an official report. Emily was in the sterilization room, scrubbing instrument trays underwater so hot her hands had turned red. The water ran nonstop, washing over metal, carrying away the last traces of blood. She scrubbed harder than necessary, as if trying to cleanse not just the blood, but the memories that had been dragged back to the surface. The desert, the wind, a young man lying on the ground, eyes wide, lips moving as he called for his mother. Emily closed her eyes. Emily Carter. The voice behind her was dry, controlled, carrying authority without needing to raise its volume. She shut off the water and turned around. Michael Rowan stood in the doorway, hands in the pockets of his lab coat. Beside him was the hospital's administrative manager, a middle-aged man with calculating eyes holding a clipboard. "Come with us," Rowan said. It wasn't an invitation. Emily nodded. She removed her gloves, discarded them, and dried her hands. Her movements were slow and composed. So calm, it unsettled the people watching. They entered a small, windowless conference room. Certificates and framed photographs of the hospital's leadership lined the walls. Expensive suits, perfect smiles. The door closed. The air thickened instantly. "Do you understand what you just did?" Rowan began, remaining standing. Emily stood straight. "I do." "You exceeded your authority." "Yes." "You assaulted a resident physician." "I moved him out of the way." "You violated sterile procedure." "Correct." Rowan tilted his head, studying her as if she were a curious specimen. "You admit everything." Emily met his gaze. "The patient would have died if I hadn't acted." The administrator tapped his pen lightly against the clipboard. "We don't debate hypotheticals, we discuss procedures." "Procedure wasn't stopping the bleeding," Emily replied evenly. "Time was." Rowan gave a thin smile. "Who do you think you are?" The question hung in the room. Emily was silent, not because she lacked an answer, but because the answer was not allowed to exist here. "You're a nurse," Rowan continued, "a new nurse. And you just created a serious legal risk for this hospital, especially given that the patient has military ties." The administrator slid a document across the table. "This is the incident report, and this," he turned to the page, "is the provisional decision." Emily looked down. Termination of employment, effective immediately. No lengthy explanation, no opportunity for appeal, just a period at the end of a sentence. Emily read it, then nodded. "Any questions?" the administrator asked, slightly surprised by her composure. Emily thought for a moment. "The patient, is he stable?" Rowan narrowed his eyes. "That is no longer your concern." Emily nodded again. "Then, I'm finished." She signed her name. The handwriting was neat, decisive, not trembling. As she stood, Rowan spoke as if unable to stop himself. "You may have destroyed your career today." Emily looked at him. Her eyes held neither resentment nor defiance. "No," she said softly. "I just did my job." 2 security officers escorted Emily out. Not roughly, but close enough to remind her she no longer belonged there. The hallway was busier now, shift change. Eyes turned toward her, curious, judgmental, whispering. Tyler Brooks stood near the elevator, a hand resting on his chest where Emily had pushed him. He watched her pass, the corner of his mouth curling upward. "Good luck," he said mockingly. "Hope you enjoy unemployment." Emily didn't respond. She carried a small cardboard box, everything she owned at Riverside. An old stethoscope, a spare pair of socks, and a worn photograph. A dog standing in a grassy field, tongue out, eyes innocent. The only thing in that hospital that had ever looked at her without judgment. When they reached the main lobby, light flooded the space. The glass doors opened to the outside world, sun, wind, and a silence waiting beyond. Emily stopped, not out of regret, but because she felt something unfinished. Upstairs in the recovery unit, a man slowly opened his eyes. Colonel Jack Mercer. He woke beneath soft lights, his body heavy, every breath painful. Unfamiliar faces surrounded him, doctors, nurses, machines. They spoke, they explained, they reassured. But his memory held on to only one thing. A sensation. A hand. Not gentle, not hesitant. A hand that pulled him back from the edge, and a voice, rough, low, commanding, cutting through the chaos. "Stop." Mercer closed his eyes, then opened them again. "The woman," he whispered. "Where is she?" No one answered right away. In the main lobby, Emily Carter took one more step toward the door. Just one more step. And she would leave Riverside forever. But sometimes, doing the right thing is not yet finished claiming its responsibility. And the cost of doing what is right has only just begun to be counted. Emily Carter stood before the glass doors of the main lobby, Arizona sunlight pouring down like a thin layer of pale gold dust. Just one more step and she would be outside. Out of Riverside. Away from the stares, the whispers, and the memories that had just been dragged up from the depths. But she hadn't taken that step yet. "Wait!" The shout echoed from the far end of the hallway, reverberating through the expansive hospital lobby. It wasn't the voice of an administrator, not security. It was a low, rough voice, carrying a kind of authority that made people stop by instinct alone. Emily turned. From the direction of the elevators, a group of people was moving toward her. They weren't running, they weren't rushing, but every step had a clear purpose, causing the crowd to part automatically, like water split by a current. At the front was a tall man with a thick beard, his shirt collar open just enough to reveal an old scar running along his collarbone. His eyes swept across the lobby, sharp, alert. 3 others followed behind him, dressed, but their posture and the way they scanned the room set them apart from civilians. Emily recognized them instantly, not logically, by instinct. Those who had lived in that world always recognized one another. The man stopped a few steps away, He looked at the cardboard box in her hands, then up at Emily's expressionless but exhausted face. "Are you Emily Carter?" he asked. Emily nodded. "I don't work here anymore." The man frowned. He turned his head, his gaze cutting through the gathering crowd, doctors, nurses, patients, families, before settling on Michael Rowan, who stood not far away, arms crossed, irritation mixed with curiosity on his face. "You don't work here?" the man repeated, his voice lowering. "Who made that decision?" Rowan stepped forward. "I did, along with hospital management. This woman committed serious protocol violations." "Doctor," the man interrupted without even turning to look at Rowan. "We weren't asking you." The air in the lobby dropped. Emily felt it, the subtle shift like the moment before a storm. The whispers faded. All eyes turned toward the center. "Ms. Emily," the man said, turning back to her, his tone softer. "My commanding officer would like to see you." Emily tightened her grip on the box. "He's alive," she said, not a question. The man nodded. "Because of you." A wave of murmurs spread. Rowan frowned and stepped forward again. "That's not possible. She's been terminated. She has no authorization to access patients, especially military personnel." This time, the man fully turned toward Rowan. His expression wasn't angry, not threatening, just cold. "Doctor," he said slowly, "if she hadn't accessed that patient, you wouldn't be standing here right now, saying any of this." Rowan opened his mouth to protest, but another voice cut in, weak yet clear. "That's enough." The crowd snapped toward the elevators. A wheelchair was being pushed forward. The man seated in it had clearly lost weight, his skin pale, one arm wrapped in heavy bandages. But his back was straight, his eyes were clear, sharp, carrying the weight known only to those who had once commanded the lives of others. Colonel Jack Mercer. Riverside Hospital had never been this silent. "Sir, you shouldn't," a nurse began, but Mercer raised a hand, signaling her to stop. His gaze searched the crowd, and when it found Emily, he knew. Emily didn't bow her head. She didn't step forward. She stood still, as if everything else had fallen away. Mercer signaled for the wheelchair to stop. He placed both hands on the armrests and pushed himself up. His body trembled for a moment, pain flashing across his face, but he didn't sit back down. In that instant, time seemed to freeze. Then he did something no one expected. Mercer raised his hand to his forehead. A slow movement, but decisive. A military salute. The only sound was the sharp intake of breath from dozens of people at once. Emily felt her throat tighten. The three men who had arrived with Mercer, men who had stood unmoving under fire, snapped to attention. Their heels struck the floor in a single dry sound. Hands rose to their foreheads, precise to the last degree. The lobby of Riverside Hospital became a silent parade ground. "Lieutenant," Mercer said, his voice hoarse but firm, "I owe you my life." A hot tear slid down Emily's cheek, though she hadn't meant it to. She inhaled deeply, feeling her spine straighten, her shoulders pull back, a posture her body had never forgotten. She set the cardboard box down on the floor, and she returned the salute. Not as Emily Carter, the fired nurse, but as the person she had once been. Michael Rowan stood frozen, his face drained of color. The words he had prepared about protocol, responsibility, liability, suddenly felt small, meaningless. "Dr. Rowan," Mercer said, lowering his hand. "You claim she violated protocol?" Rowan swallowed hard. "Sir, yes, she—" "Your protocol," Mercer interrupted, "would have left me dead." Rowan shook his head. "We had—" "No," Mercer said, his voice dropping. We fought together for more than 20 years. I know what a life-saving decision looks like, and I know who made it." He turned to Emily. "You don't belong in a place where the truth is treated as a threat." Emily met his gaze, eyes red but resolute. "I didn't do it for recognition." Mercer nodded. "I know. People like you never do." At that moment, a man in a black suit stepped out of the elevator behind them. He carried a slim briefcase, his expression stern. "Dr. Michael Rowan?" he asked. Rowan turned, his heart pounding. "Yes?" "I'm a representative of the Federal Medical Ethics Council," the man said. "We've just received footage from Trauma Bay 1, along with several reports that are quite concerning." Rowan took a step back. "Doctor," Mercer added calmly, his tone edged with steel. "The battlefield teaches us one thing. The truth always finds a way out." The murmurs rose again, this time not cruel, but stunned, disbelieving. Emily stood there at the center of it all. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a woman who no longer had to stay silent. But deep in her eyes, something else was stirring. A familiar feeling, as if the battle she thought she had left behind had only just begun. The lobby of Riverside Hospital still carried the echo of that military salute. No one spoke loudly. No one dared break the stillness that had just been erected by truth itself. But Emily Carter knew one thing the people around her had not yet realized. This silence was not peace. It felt exactly like the moment before a dawn raid, when everything is too quiet, when instinct screams that something is coming. Emily bent down and picked up the cardboard box. Her hands were still slightly shaking, but this time not from emotion. She lifted her head, her eyes sweeping quickly across the lobby, the glass doors, the side entrances, the elevators, the security cameras mounted on the ceiling. Everything was too perfect. Colonel Jack Mercer settled back into his wheelchair, his breathing heavier now. A nurse stepped forward to adjust his IV line, but Mercer waved her off. "Give me a minute," he said, then turned to Emily. "You feel it too, don't you?" Emily nodded. "Someone's watching." Mercer studied her closely, not surprised. Just a quiet confirmation between two people accustomed to trusting instinct over explanation. "The ones who shot us," Mercer said softly, just loud enough for Emily and the bearded man to hear. "They don't abandon a job halfway." The bearded man, Harris, raised a hand to his ear and spoke quietly into a concealed microphone. His expression tightened. "Sir," Harris replied, "hospital security reports a camera malfunction on the 4th floor. Signal dropped 3 minutes ago." Emily spun around. 4th floor, old surgical wing, long corridors, few people, plenty of blind spots. "They're already inside the building," she said. No shouting, no alarms. Just one sentence, enough to change the air. Mercer nodded, his expression not panicked, just focused. "They want me." "No," Emily corrected. "They want what you're carrying." Mercer pressed his lips together. "Then this hospital is no longer safe." A very soft click came from the ceiling, almost impossible to hear if you weren't listening. The hallway lights flickered once, then steadied. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "The backup generator's about to kick in," she said. "Someone's interfering with the system." As if to confirm her words, the lobby lights went out, one heartbeat. Then the dim red glow of emergency lights flooded the space, bathing everything in an unhealthy hue. The murmurs exploded into panicked voices. "What's happening? Power outage? Has anyone called security?" Emily stepped forward. "Listen to me," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through the chaos. "This is not a technical failure." All eyes turned to her. "There are armed individuals in this building. Emily continued, and they will not distinguish between doctors and patients. A sharp bang echoed from somewhere far off, not loud, controlled. Panic surged. "Lock down the lobby," Harris shouted to the security team. "No one goes outside." Mercer looked at Emily. "What do you need?" Emily thought for an instant, no longer than a single breath. "We need time," she said, "and we need to move patients out of sight." "How many?" Harris asked. "At least 4, Emily replied. "Professionals, not amateurs." Mercer tightened his grip on the wheelchair armrest. "Then they'll come straight for me." Emily scanned the lobby, the frightened faces, the nurses who once mocked her, the doctors who believed themselves untouchable. Now they all looked the same, vulnerable. "No," she said. "They'll be forced to go through me first." Harris stared at her. "You don't have a weapon." Emily glanced at the nearby emergency station, scalpels, oxygen tanks, metal carts. "I have enough." Another muffled explosion sounded, closer this time. Emily turned to Mercer. "I need your cooperation." Mercer didn't hesitate. "Give the order." "We move you to the 4th floor, Emily said. "Operating room 3. Thick walls, few entrances. I'll lead." Harris frowned. "That's the opposite direction of the exits." "Exactly," Emily replied, "which is why they won't expect it." Mercer let out a low chuckle, rough, tired, but full of understanding. "You still think the same way you always did." Emily didn't answer. They moved quickly, but without chaos. Harris and 2 of his men formed a protective ring around Mercer. Emily walked ahead, one hand on the wheelchair frame, her eyes constantly scanning the dark corners. Footsteps echoed in the dim corridor. Machines hummed softly, and somewhere metal brushed lightly against metal. Emily raised a hand, signaling them to stop. She bent down and picked up a glove lying on the floor, not hospital-issued. Black rubber. Tactical. "They're close," she whispered. Harris reached instinctively for his firearm, then remembered where they were. He clenched his jaw. Emily placed a hand on an oxygen tank resting on a nearby cart, testing its weight. Just right. "Listen," she said quickly, "if anything happens, you have to trust me." Mercer looked at her. "I trusted you the moment I opened my eyes." They moved on. At the end of the corridor, the elevator doors slid open without a sound. 4 figures stepped out, dressed in black, faces covered, silenced weapons. No one screamed. No one ran. Time stretched thin, like a wire about to snap. Emily placed a hand on Harris's shoulder and shook her head slightly. "Don't fire. Not here." She stepped forward. "Stop," Emily said. Her voice was unnervingly calm. "You're in a hospital." The lead figure tilted his head, almost curious. "Move." "No," Emily replied. "I can't." He raised his weapon. In that instant, Emily hurled the oxygen tank, not at him, at the wall beside his head. Metal slammed into concrete with a deafening crack. The tank skidded violently across the floor, the valves snapping loose as compressed gas erupted outward. Emily pulled Mercer and Harris back just in time. Boom! The pressure wave tore through the corridor. 2 of the black-clad figures were thrown hard into the wall. The third staggered. The 4th went down, his weapon flying from his hand. Without waiting a second longer, Emily charged. She didn't strike unthinkingly. Every movement had a target. Wrist, knee joint, throat. A scalpel flashed beneath the red emergency lights. Not lethal, just enough to disable. Harris froze for half a second, then surged forward to help. Within a few breaths, the corridor fell silent again. Emily stood amid 4 unmoving bodies, her chest rising and falling hard. Blood dripped from a shallow cut on her arm. She didn't notice. She turned to Mercer. "That was only a scout team," she said. There will be more. Mercer nodded, his gaze darkening. Then we don't have much time. Emily looked up toward the stairwell leading to the rooftop, where night wind howled through gaps in the steel doors. No, she said quietly, but enough, if we don't wait. Somewhere in the building, a metal door was blown apart. The real fight had only just begun. The metal door at the end of the corridor blew open with a deep, dry, decisive blast. Not the sound of random gunfire, but the sound of someone who knew exactly how much force it took to break an obstacle. Emily Carter froze for half a second. Just half a second. But in that half second, everything she had become, the nurse, the woman who had just been fired, the person who wanted to believe she had left war behind, was shoved aside. What rose in its place was instinct. Move, now! Emily's voice dropped. No hesitation, no softness. Harris understood immediately. He and the other man pushed Mercer's wheelchair into the left-hand side corridor, where red emergency lights pulsed like a panicked heartbeat. Emily brought up the rear, her hand tight around the scalpel, ears tuned to every subtle shift in the space. Footsteps. Not rushed. Not hurried. They weren't running. They knew the hospital was in chaos, and they knew time was on their side. Emily flicked her gaze across the rooms lining the hallway. Some still held patients. Some were empty. Pale faces peered through cracked doors, not knowing what was happening, only that something terrible was drawing closer. Lock the doors, Emily said as she passed the nurse's station. Turn off the lights. Don't open for anyone unless you hear my voice. A young nurse stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. And what about us? Emily paused for one beat. She looked the girl straight in the eyes. Sit down, breathe, and trust me. Not reassurance. The only order that would keep them alive. They reached operating room 3, the one Emily had chosen from the start. Thick door, concrete walls, one main entrance and a small secondary door for equipment. Harris slammed the door shut and locked it. The other man dragged a metal cart across as a barricade. Mercer's breathing grew heavy, sweat beaded on his forehead. How many of them? Emily tilted her head, listening. At least 8, she said. Maybe 10. And they're not here to negotiate. Mercer closed his eyes briefly. I'm carrying what they need. A code key. If they get it, a lot of people will die. Emily didn't ask for details. She was used to information that didn't need full explanations. Then we keep them out, she said. As long as possible. A sharp click sounded from outside, metal testing the lock. They were trying the door. Emily scanned the room. Operating table, surgical lights, instrument carts, spare oxygen tanks, defibrillator. Everything was in the right place, if you knew how to use it. She removed her light jacket, wrapped it tightly around her scraped arm, and tied it off with a clean, efficient motion. No groan, no hesitation. What are you thinking? Harris asked quietly. Emily stared at the door. That they won't wait long. As if in answer, a heavy blast slammed into the door. The frame shuddered, hinges screamed. Mercer gripped the point wheelchair armrests. If they get in, then I won't let them get out, Emily cut in. Not bravado, just a truth she had accepted long ago. She dragged an oxygen tank over to the side door, laid it horizontally, and adjusted the valve. Then she used surgical tape to secure it to the door handle. Fast, precise. Harris watched, realization dawning. You're turning it into... No, Emily said. Not a bomb. Just force. The whine of a drill started outside. Metal shrieked. Each second stretched endlessly. Emily positioned herself off to the side of the door, scalpel hidden along her forearm. She closed her eyes for the briefest moment, not to pray, but to find stillness. Desert, hot wind, a small unit pinned between two lines of fire. Calm, observe, decide, act. 3, Harris whispered. No, Emily corrected. 2. The door burst open. Cold air rushed in and dark shapes charged through. Emily yanked the restraint. The oxygen tank valve snapped free. Compressed gas exploded outward, creating a violent thrust. The metal tank rocketed forward like a projectile, slamming into the first attacker's chest, hurling him backwards and knocking 2 more down behind him. Smoke and dust filled the air. Emily surged forward. No shouting, no warning. She shattered their momentum before they could process what was happening. One scalpel strike, fast, clean, sliced into the tendon of the gunman's wrist. He screamed, weapon dropping. Emily kicked it away, pivoted as a stray bullet grazed past her shoulder. She slid beneath the operating table, rolled to the other side and grabbed the defibrillator. Her fingers hit the charge button. Another attacker lunged. "Clear," Emily said, pure reflex, and slammed the paddles onto his chest. 360 joules ripped through him. His body convulsed violently before collapsing. Harris dragged Mercer farther back into the room. The other man smashed a metal cart into the head of a stunned attacker. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore into the walls, throwing sparks. Emily felt a heavy blow to her hip. Pain flared, sharp and burning. She gritted her teeth, spun, and drove her full weight into the attacker, slamming him into an instrument cabinet. Metal crashed, tools scattered. She didn't stop. There was no time for pain. Another attacker raised a grenade. Emily saw it in an instant. The red emergency light reflected off the smooth metal sphere. "Down!" she shouted. Harris and Mercer barely dropped behind the operating table before the explosion hit. The blast tore through the room. Glass shattered. Surgical lights swung wildly. Emily was thrown into the wall, her vision spinning. Her ears rang, deafened. She slid to the floor, breathing hard. Blood ran from her forehead into her eyes. "Get up." The voice in her head was cold, clear, not finished. Emily pushed herself upright. In front of her stood the last one, the leader. He was steady, eyes cold behind the mask. Gun leveled at her. "You could have avoided this," he said. "We know who you are." Emily gave a thin smile. "And you came anyway." "You're not a soldier anymore," he replied. "You're just a nurse." Emily stared straight down the barrel. "No," she said quietly. "I was never just one thing." He pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. That instant, just one instant, was all Emily needed. She lunged, knocked the gun aside, spun, and used the momentum to slam him to the floor. They rolled, crashing into the operating table. He was stronger, heavier. His hands closed around her throat, pressure crushing her vision. Air vanished. Emily's hand scrabbled across the floor, touched something cold. Pull, drive, thrust. He screamed and released her. Emily rolled away, gasping. She didn't stand immediately. She sat there, back against the operating table, chest heaving. The room fell silent. Only breathing remained. Mercer looked at her, his eyes filled with shock and something more profound. "You just saved all of us." Emily wiped blood from her eyes. "Not yet," she said. "They'll come back." Harris looked at the unmoving bodies. "Then we need to move." Emily lifted her head, eyes tracking upward toward the ceiling, where night wind howled through steel seams. "No," she said. "We go to the roof." Mercer understood instantly. "You're planning to—" "Not run," Emily said. "End this." Outside, the sound of a helicopter thundered closer, heavy, low, and carrying no mark of rescue. Emily stood fully, bruised, bleeding, in pain, but her eyes had never been clearer. The war she thought she had left behind was calling her once again. And this time, she was ready to answer. The stairwell leading to the rooftop was narrow and dark, cold concrete beneath the handrail. Each footstep landed with a dull thud, echoing back into the chest like a warning drumbeat. Emily Carter led the way. No signals, no explanations. Harris and the other man supported Colonel Mercer behind her, one step at a time. Every stair was a trial for Mercer's exhausted body, but he didn't complain. He understood, at this height, time mattered more than strength. The sound of the helicopter above grew louder. Not a rescue helicopter. No steady, reassuring rhythm. It was the sound of a machine built for suppression. Emily stopped at the heavy steel door leading to the roof. She placed her hand on the handle, feeling vibrations hum through the metal. Wind screamed on the other side, carrying the scent of rain and fuel. "We get one chance," she said, her voice low but clear. "If we don't control the first moment, there won't be a second." Mercer nodded. "What do you need from me?" Emily looked at him, not as a superior officer, but as someone who had stood on this edge before. "Trust me. And when I say go, you go." Harris tightened the strap of the armor hidden beneath his jacket. "And you?" Emily didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath, then pushed the door open. Wind slammed into them, fierce enough to sting the eyes. Rain swept sideways, torn apart by the rotor wash. The rooftop opened wide, exposed, empty, unforgiving. A black helicopter hovered several meters above the roof. Its searchlight swept back and forth, white beams slicing through the rain. Beneath that light, 4 figures were rappelling down, movements synchronized, precise, nothing wasted. Emily pulled Mercer and Harris back behind a large ventilation unit just as the first round punched into the concrete, throwing sparks. "We've been spotted," Harris said. "No," Emily replied. "We were expected." She scanned the rooftop, spare oxygen tanks, electrical cabinets, fixed metal structures. No perfect cover, only choices. Mercer panted. "They've got more people." Emily nodded. "That's why we don't fight their way." One figure touched down, rolled and rose in a single fluid motion, weapon up. Rounds tore through the air, slamming into the vent behind Emily. She didn't wait. Emily sprinted left, sliding across the wet concrete, rolling past an oxygen tank lying on its side. She kicked it hard, sending it moving forward. Not fast, but enough to draw attention. One attacker tracked the movement with his gun. Emily took the moment. She sprang up, cut diagonally, leapt onto the roof's edge, then dropped. Not off the building, but down half a meter onto a narrow maintenance ledge. Gunfire snapped overhead, missing her. Emily clung to the edge and hauled herself behind a metal pillar. Her heart hammered, yet her mind was eerily calm. Everything, rain, wind, engine noise, sorted itself into clean layers of information. 3 on the right, 2 on the left. 1 is still on the rope. She tightened her grip on the scalpel, the blade thin, bright, cold. Harris returned fire in controlled bursts, pinning 2 attackers down. Mercer stayed low, hands gripping the wheelchair rims, eyes locked on Emily. Emily surged forward. She didn't charge straight. She cut angles. One attacker had just landed and hadn't disengaged his rope. Emily grabbed it, spun, and threw her weight back. The line snapped tight, yanking him off balance and slamming him hard into the helicopter's side. Metal crashed against metal. The helicopter wobbled. "Move!" someone shouted over the radio. Emily gave them no time. She lunged to the oxygen tank she'd rolled earlier and twisted the valve with a violent yank. Compressed gas blasted out, white vapor exploding across the roof, forming instant cover. She shouted, not to command, but to distract. "Mercer, go!" Harris shoved the wheelchair toward the far stairwell. Rounds ripped through the gas cloud, hammering the concrete behind them. One grazed Harris's arm, making him stumble. Emily spun back. She threw the scalpel. The blade buried itself in the wrist of the shooter, sending his gun clattering away. Emily closed the distance and smashed him down with his own weapon in a single turn. She turned just in time to see another attacker raise a grenade. Time slowed. Emily saw every detail: the metal ring, the pin, rain beating on its surface. 2 seconds. She sprinted to Mercer and Harris, shoving them flat to the ground. "Face down!" The explosion ripped the air apart. Pressure tore across the rooftop. The building shook violently. Emily was hurled backwards, skidding across the concrete, her shoulder slamming into the pillar's edge. Pain flared, blinding. Her ears rang solid. "Get up!" The voice in her head was cold and clear. She pushed herself up, half stumbling. Ahead of her stood one man, the commander. He was still upright, armor scratched, eyes steel cold. He raised his weapon. Emily had no gun. He pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. Emily laughed, a hoarse, short sound, without humor. She charged before he could reload. They collided, rolling across the slick rooftop. He was strong, very strong. His fist drove into Emily's ribs, knocking the breath from her. She answered with knees, elbows, anything her body could still deliver. He clamped his hands around her throat. Rain flooded her eyes. Air ran out. Emily felt the familiar boundary closing in, the place where everything dims. Then, her hand hit a wheel. Mercer. Emily gathered everything she had left and kicked, rolling them both forward. They slammed into the wheelchair, the impact breaking his grip. Emily rolled free, gasping, and snatched up a nearby dropped pistol. She didn't aim long. 2 shots, clean. He went down, motionless. The helicopter roared. The pilot pulled up. The machine lurched, then retreated. No reinforcements. No rescue team. Just a hurried withdrawal. The rooftop returned to rain and wind. Emily stood in it, chest heaving, blood mixing with rain as it ran down her chin. She looked around. Harris was wounded but standing. Mercer is breathing hard but alive. In the distance, police sirens and flashing lights began to appear around the hospital. Late, but coming. Emily released her grip. The gun fell to the concrete with a sharp, final clack. She stepped back. Then another step. This time not from fear, from exhaustion. Mercer looked at her, eyes deep and warm. "You did more than was required." Emily shook her head, rain splashing her face. "Just enough." Harris stepped up and rested a hand on her shoulder. "You just saved a hospital." Emily gazed into the blurred darkness ahead. Wind tore away any words left unsaid. "No," she said softly. "I just didn't let it become a battlefield." In that moment, amid rain, wind, and distant lights, Emily Carter stood tall. No longer the woman who had been fired, no longer the nurse who had been underestimated, but the person she had always been, the one who steps forward when everything collapses. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this fight was nearing its end. Rain still fell on the hospital rooftop, but no longer violently. The wind had shifted. The metallic roar of the helicopter blades faded into the distance, leaving behind a strange void, a kind of silence that was no longer threatening, but not yet peace. Emily Carter stood still, looking down at her hands. Rainwater mixed with blood, running over scrapes and bruises that were darkening by the minute. Those hands had once trembled with memory. Now they were tired, but steady. Harris signaled over the radio. His voice was low and clipped, the tone of someone accustomed to reporting after contact. "Hostiles have withdrawn. Rooftop secure. Requesting immediate medical support." Below in the hospital courtyard, the blue and red lights of police cars and ambulances flashed, reflecting in puddles. Sirens wailed, late confirmations that the outside world had finally arrived. Emily turned to look at Mercer. He leaned back in his wheelchair, breathing heavily, but his eyes were still sharp. Some people didn't need to stand to project authority. He was one of them. "We should go down," Mercer said. "There's no reason to stay up here." Emily nodded. She helped Harris support Mercer, step by slow step, back toward the stairwell. Each stair was a breath. Each breath was a reminder. They had survived. When they entered the fourth-floor corridor, the hospital felt like a living organism recovering from a violent convulsion. Shattered glass, flickering lights, the smell of smoke mixed with disinfectant, an unmistakable scent of disaster just past. Doors stood ajar. Pale faces looked out, doctors, nurses, patients. No one spoke. They looked at Emily as if she had stepped out of a story that did not belong in a hospital. Emily dipped her head slightly, not in shame and not in pride. She needed to pass through. In the main lobby, the crowd had dispersed. What remained were traces, an overturned chair, fallen signs, rainwater footprints stretching across the floor. The hospital administrator stood near the reception desk, visibly shaken. The words he had prepared about protocol, about responsibility, now sounded out of place even to himself. Mercer motioned for him to come closer. "Your hospital was just protected," Mercer said, his voice tired but clear. "Not by procedure, by people." The administrator swallowed and glanced at Emily. "We made a mistake." Emily didn't respond. She looked up at the electronic board displaying the time. It kept moving. The hospital kept admitting patients. The world didn't stop because of one violent night. "There are mistakes," Mercer continued, "that can't be fixed with an apology. But they can be fixed with action." He turned to Emily. "You don't belong here anymore, do you?" Emily thought for a moment. "Maybe. I never did," she said quietly. Mercer nodded. "Then don't force yourself to stay." A small group of medical staff approached, people who had once avoided Emily's gaze. They didn't speak. One nurse gently placed a bottle of water into her hand. Another offered bandages. Small gestures. Quiet. Genuine. Emily accepted them. She took a sip of water. Her throat burned. Harris stepped closer. "We've received intel," he said. "The attackers are connected to a larger network. They won't disappear overnight." Emily looked at him. "I know." "And they know you," Harris added. "That changes everything." Emily was silent. She thought of her empty apartment, of sleepless nights, of how she had tried to become someone else, softer, quieter, only to be called back by the same storm. Mercer gestured for Harris to step away. He rolled closer to Emily and lowered his voice. "There's a mission," he said, unofficial, quiet. "We need someone who understands how to protect without destroying." Emily met his gaze. "You're asking me to come back?" "No," Mercer shook his head. "I'm asking you to choose." The question hung between them, heavier than any gunfire before it. Emily looked around the lobby, the place that had mocked her, pushed her out. She felt no anger, only distance. "Give me a minute," she said. Emily stepped outside onto the covered entrance. The rain had eased. Cool air carried the scent of wet earth. She inhaled deeply. For the first time in years, her chest didn't feel heavy. She thought of the people who had lived because of her, and the people who would live if she returned. She thought of the old question, how long someone could run from themselves. Emily went back inside. "My conditions," she said to Mercer. "No spectacle, no titles, and no one gets left behind. Mercer smiled, a tired smile, but real. We don't need symbols. We need a gatekeeper. Emily nodded. Then I'll hold the gate. The formalities were swift. No lengthy paperwork, no cameras, just nods exchanged between people who understood the cost of choice. As the sun began to rise, pale light swept across cracks in the glass. The hospital woke to a new day, carrying a story not everyone would tell. Emily stood on the steps, wrapped in the light jacket Harris had given her. She turned back for one last look at Riverside. No resentment, no longing, just the closing of a chapter. Mercer stopped his wheelchair beside her. There's a name, he said. Not a rank, just a way to refer to it. Emily looked at him. I don't need a name. Mercer nodded. I know. But sometimes the name isn't for the one who carries it. It's for the ones being protected. Emily was quiet. Then she exhaled softly. Call me when you need me, she said. I'll come. They left while the sun was still low. No fanfare, no praise. Just a woman stepping out of the darkness of a rainy night, carrying old wounds and a new decision. And somewhere, very deep down, Emily Carter knew a fight doesn't always end with gunfire. Sometimes it ends with staying when everyone else walks away. Morning at Riverside Regional arrived more slowly than usual. Not because the sun hesitated to rise, but because the people inside the building were not yet ready to believe that the night was truly over. The corridors had been cleaned, broken glass replaced, bullet marks were covered with temporary metal plates painted to match the wall's color. Hospitals are good at hiding damage, just like people. Emily Carter stood at the rear exit where there were no signs, no media cameras. A light jacket rested on her shoulders, her hair still damp from the rain. She checked her watch, not because she was in a hurry to leave, but to be sure she had stayed long enough. Harris appeared behind her, footsteps quiet. The car's ready. Emily nodded. Give me one more minute. Harris didn't ask why. He had learned that with people like Emily, 1 minute could be an entire lifetime. She turned back and walked slowly along the ground floor corridor. Daylight revealed tired faces, eyes, reddened by lack of sleep. Some people avoided her gaze. Others met it directly, silent but different now. A young nurse stood near the intake desk. She was the same one who, the night before, had asked Emily what would happen to them. Now she stood straighter, her hands steady as she held her clipboard. Good morning, she said, her voice still hoarse. Emily offered a very slight smile. Morning. Just one word, but enough. In the staff lounge, the air was still. Cold coffee cups sat on tables, chairs were out of place. On the notice board, someone had taken down an old sheet, Emily's shift assignment, and replaced it with a blank page, untouched. Emily stopped in front of the locker in the corner. Her locker, now empty. She opened it and looked into the small, bare space. No belongings, no traces. But something invisible remained, a story that had passed through this place and left behind a heavy silence. She closed the locker. When Emily stepped back into the lobby, she saw Tyler Brooks standing near the elevator. No crisp lab coat, no mocking smile, just a young man with slumped shoulders. Emily, he said hesitantly, I want to apologize. Emily stopped, not surprised, not annoyed. For what? She asked. Tyler swallowed. For thinking I knew who you were. Emily looked at him calmly. We all do that, she said. It's the easiest way to feel safe. Tyler nodded, as if realizing something far too late. Thank you, he said. Emily didn't reply. Not because she hadn't forgiven him, but because forgiveness doesn't require confirmation. At the main entrance, Mercer was waiting. He had been transferred to an ambulance bound for a higher security facility. He looked weaker than the night before, but his eyes were still bright. "Have you said your goodbyes?" Mercer asked. Emily looked around. "I think enough." Mercer nodded. "There are places we leave without looking back." As they stepped outside, the morning sunlight washed everything in a pale, gentle glow. Birds, traffic, ordinary life continued, unaware it had nearly vanished during the night. Emily took a deep breath. "You know," she said, "I used to think that if I walked away from everything, I'd find peace." Mercer smiled sadly. "And then I understood," Emily continued. "Peace isn't running away. It's accepting who you are." Mercer studied her for a long moment. "We have a name," he said. "Not a rank, not a title." Emily frowned. "I already said I know," Mercer interrupted, raising a hand. "This name isn't written anywhere. It's only spoken among those who stood together in the dark." He paused. "Valkyrie." Emily let out a soft, unexpected laugh. "That sounds dramatic." "No," Mercer said. "It means you choose who lives." Emily grew quiet. She thought of the decisions she had made, those fleeting seconds where a wrong choice left no chance for correction. "Then I'll carry it," she said softly. "But not for myself." "For whom?" Mercer asked. "For those who have no one to stand up for them," Emily replied. The vehicle began to move. Riverside Regional receded behind them, growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Emily looked back one last time, not at the building, but at the people inside it. Those who would tell this story in many different ways. Some would exaggerate. Some would forget the most crucial detail: that silence does not mean weakness. In another city, weeks later, a small windowless meeting room. No insignias, no flags, just maps and people who disliked the spotlight. Emily sat at the far end of the table. She didn't speak much, didn't issue orders. She listened. When it was her turn, she said only one sentence. "We protect by arriving before the storm." No one laughed. No one doubted. They nodded, because they recognized that voice, the voice of someone who had stood where there was no retreat. Night fell. Emily stood alone by a window, city lights spread out below like an inverted sky. Her hands, once trembling, were now still, not because the memories were gone, but because they had found their place. She thought of Riverside, of the young nurse, of Tyler, of the people who would walk into that hospital carrying fear and hope. Maybe they would never know her name. Maybe they would never know what had happened, and that was fine. Because some people are born not to be remembered, but to make sure others still have the chance to be. Emily Carter turned away from the window. The light behind her dimmed. Somewhere, far away, one door closed, and another door, nameless, unmarked, quietly opened. Life does not promise peace, but for those who dare to stay when everyone else walks away, it promises meaning. Some stories don't end with applause. No swelling background music, no stage lights. They end in silence. And that silence lingers longer than any ovation ever could. Emily Carter stood by the window of the small room where she was temporarily staying. The city below was lit up. Traffic flowed like a river of light, unaware that lives had been preserved during the rainy night by decisions that allowed no hesitation. She placed her hand against the glass. cold, like the metal of an operating table, like the concrete floor of a hospital rooftop. The old images no longer rushed at her in waves. They came more slowly now, more clearly, no longer tearing at her, just reminding her of those who never returned, of the times she chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. Emily closed her eyes. She thought of Riverside, not the building, but the moments. The look in the young nurse's eyes when she heard an order and understood she was protected. The confusion of doctors who had believed the procedure could replace judgment. And the very slight but genuine bow of the head from someone who had learned how to see another person truly. Somewhere in the city, another hospital was on night shift. Another woman was mopping floors, changing sheets, and pushing a medication cart. Maybe she too was quiet. Perhaps she too carried battles no one could see. Emily thought of that and smiled, very faintly. A few days later, Riverside Regional returned to its normal rhythm. The news passed through like a gust of wind, strong enough to rattle windows but not long enough to change the weather. The stories were retold in many ways. Some called it a security incident, others a miracle, and some chose silence. But there were minor changes, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. A new sign appeared in the staff lounge. If you're unsure, ask. If you're afraid, speak. Night shifts were assigned more fairly. A young resident paused before making a sarcastic remark. And in one corner of the break room, someone hung a grainy still from a security camera. A woman standing beneath red emergency lights, holding medical equipment as if it were a shield. Beneath it, a single word handwritten in black marker. Respect. No name, no caption, just a reminder. Somewhere else, farther away, where there were no signs, no logos, Emily stepped into a plain meeting room. Maps spread across the table. Faces are more familiar with shadows than with light. No one asked about her past. No one demanded proof. They asked only one question. Who do we protect? Emily answered without hesitation. Those who don't have time to be protected. No one laughed. No one argued. Because they understood that some answers only exist when the speaker has stood at the edge. Emily wore no uniform, no insignia. She didn't need them. What she carried couldn't be seen, calm when everything collapses, the ability to see what matters amid chaos, and the resolve to choose what's right, even when the cost is being misunderstood. Some nights she still couldn't sleep. Some mornings her hands still trembled slightly when the weather shifted, but she no longer hated that. They weren't signs of weakness. They were proof that she had survived. Emily often returned to an old question, the one no one at the hospital had ever asked her. Why did you do all of this? She had never had a neat answer, not to be called a hero, not to fix the world, but because there are moments when, if no one stands up, the price is too high. She believed true strength doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need a podium. It only needs to be in the right place at the right time and not turn away. One evening, Emily received a short message. No signature, no symbol. A small hospital. A storm is on the way. We need someone to hold the gate. Emily stared at the screen for a long time. Then she set the phone down. She stepped onto the balcony and breathed in the night air. The city below was still noisy, still rushing, still convinced that tomorrow would be just like today. She smiled, this time fully. Emily replied with a single word. Coming. Some people pass through our lives like a gust of wind. Some stay long enough to change the trajectory. Emily Carter doesn't need to be remembered. She doesn't need her name spoken. But the people who stood in that emergency room that night, the ones who trembled, who doubted, who were afraid, they will remember one thing: that silence is not emptiness. That sometimes the quietest person is carrying the most. And that's when everything starts to fall apart. What matters isn't what you say, but whether you stay. Emily turned off the light. The room sank into darkness. Outside, the world kept turning. Somewhere, another storm was forming. And somewhere within that darkness, a woman stood still, ready, not to be seen, but to make sure others still had the chance to see tomorrow. If this story made you pause for a moment, if it made you look at the quiet person beside you differently, leave a like. Please share this story with someone you think needs to hear it. And subscribe to Deep Life Tales so we can continue telling stories about people who aren't loud, but who stay when they're needed most.